Amara and Ryan were the picture-perfect couple. They were the envy of their friends and family, with a relationship that appeared to be filled with love, laughter, and adventure. Amaka, a successful businesswoman, had a penchant for drama and attention. She was the type that always loved to show off her marriage and tell stories of her and Ryan among her friends. Whenever she was with her friends, she would use most of the times to tell them how Ryan treats her with so much love and passion. Even when her husband Ryan bought things for her, she would first of all show them to her friends before making use of them. Amaka would always go as far as telling them how expensive the clothes and jewelries were and that her husband ordered them from outside the country. Amaka also boasted that she lives her life like a queen and that Ryan does almost everything in the house for her, including washing and cleaning of the house. He doesn't allow her touch anything most of the times, and that was how much he loved her. There was no passing day that Amaka will not look for any little opportunity to share her love story with anyone who cares to listen, including her customers. Her friends, Omotola and Sandra, envied her so much, they both wished that their lives were as sweet as that of Amaka's own. Sandra was married, but Omotola, who was the youngest among them, was praying seriously for God to give her a husband that will treat her just like Ryan was treating his wife. Because of what Amaka always told her friends, Sandra most of the times would regret getting married to her husband Eric, who she thought was not giving her enough love, care, and attention. This made Sandra to always pick fights with her husband over some little issues. She had always longed to visit Amaka, but that was one of the things Amaka had refused to give her friends access to. Amaka hated her friends coming to her house. She would always find a way to give them one excuses or the other and getting them lots of reasons why they should not come. Sometimes, she would tell them that Ryan doesn't like it when people visit her, that he needed her all to himself whenever they were at home. Amaka's friends were very sad, but still waited patiently for that day that Amaka would invite them to her house. Ryan, on the other hand, never stopped talking about Amaka and how sweet their marriage was. Though Ryan wasn't always the talking type, but whenever discussions about marriage arises between him and his friends, he would take his time to narrate his love story with Amaka to them. From the way he presented things before them, one of his friends asked him one day if he doesn't fight or quarrel with Amaka, and Ryan answered and told them that he can't even remember the last time he had a little misunderstanding with his wife. He went ahead and told them that their home was always peaceful and his marriage with Amaka was the definition of a perfect marriage.
Ryan too restricted his friends from visiting his home. One day, Amaka's friends visited her in her shop as usual, and they were surprised to see Amaka with bruises all over her face and body. Though Amaka looked happy even with those bruises, but out of curiosity, they needed to ask her why she had those bruises. Sandra raised the question and they expected Amaka's mood to change, but instead, Amaka smiled broadly, adjusting her hair and clothes. "Why are you all smiles?" Omotola asked, looking confused, and Amaka cleared her throat and told them that Ryan mistakenly poured water on the stairs, and while she was coming down the stairs, she slipped and fell, sustaining the injuries on her body. While she narrated this, she was still smiling happily, confusing het friends the more. "To me, this is not a thing to be happy about," Sandra said to Amaka, who then told them that the reason for her happiness was because Ryan had promised to make proper arrangements for her to travel out of the country and spend some days in celebration of her birthday, which was coming up the end of the coming month. Sandra and Omotola could not believe their ears. They thought it was a joke, but Amaka made them believe that it wasn't. They were genuinely happy for her, but Sandra was inwardly burning in anger. Her own birthday was just a few days around the corner, and her husband was not even saying anything about it. He had never celebrated her birthday in a big way, all he does was just to buy her gifts.
After the discussion that day, Sandra went home and prepared for war against her husband. She was ready to throw his sins at his face. When Eric, Sandra's husband, finally got home, Sandra did not even care to welcome him, rather, she stood in front of him with an angry look. "When is my birthday, Eric?" Sandra asked, her two hands on her waist. Eric wondered what the attitude was all about, but still went ahead and answered her. Sandra asked him how he was preparing for it, and Eric replied that he would get her something special that day. Sandra flared up and began to abuse her husband, comparing him with Ryan and telling him how his mates were treating their wives better than he does to her. Eric, who was confused, managed to ask her what she wanted for her birthday, and Sandra said to him that she wants a one-week vacation in the UK. Eric burst into laughter and laughed until his stomach began to ache. He asked her again to repeat what she said, and Sandra said the same thing, sounding very serious. Eric stared at her from head to toe, and without another word, he turned and went inside. That alone got Sandra very angry, and she began to scold and yell at Eric as he went inside. At the end, she told him that if he was not ready to do it, then their marriage was over. She yelled until she got tired. St. night, Sandra woke Eric up over the same issue again. Eric then explained to her that he was having issues in his business, and if he should pull out that amount of money, he would go bankrupt. He told her to be patient, that by next year, he would sponsor her trip, but Sandra refused to oblige. She insisted that Eric must sponsor her trip that year, or she would simply pack her bags and leave the marriage for good. Eric took his time to explain things to her, but none of his explanations made sense to Sandra. From that very day, Sandra began to keep malice with her husband. She doesn't talk to him and hated to see him with her eyes. She wanted Eric to be just like Ryan. This continued until Sandra's birthday finally came. Eric refused to go to work that day. He just wanted to prove to Sandra that he loved her and really wanted her to be happy. He went as far as buying a brand new car for Sandra, but instead of her to be happy, she hissed and rained all manner of abuses on Eric, telling him that he was not man enough. Her words really got deep into Eric, and he became upset. Eric, out of anger, told Sandra that she was ungrateful and she lacked understanding. The two got into a heated argument, and in the course of the fight, Sandra went inside, packed her bags, and left Eric's house. Eric did nothing, he simply watched her as she left. Sandra boarded a taxi that took her to Amaka's house. She wanted to go and tell her friend how bad Eric had been treating her. When Sandra got to Amaka's door, she was about to knock when she began to hear voices from inside. She was sure those voices were that of Amaka and Ryan. The two were seriously arguing and abusing each other. Sandra's mouth was wide open as many thoughts ran through her head. She was in great doubt, and because she needed to know the truth, she had to ask one of the neighbors if that apartment was truly occupied by Amaka and her husband, Ryan, the perfect couple. The kind neighbor said to her that the voices she was hearing was that of Amaka and Ryan. That is their everyday routine, the neighbor said. She also told Sandra that a day hardly passed without them fighting each other. Sandra was beyond shocked to hear that. She couldn't believe her ears, and she had to go back to listen to them again. She heard Amaka telling Ryan that he was useless and is not fit to be called a husband. Amaka was also telling him that ever since she got married to him, he had never bought anything for her, and she goes out of her way to buy gifts for herself and tell her friends that they were bought by her husband. Amaka said again that Ryan had never celebrated her birthday or even gifted her anything, not to talk of helping out with the house chores. Ryan replied by telling Amaka that he was tired of her and doesn't love her at all. He said that Amaka should pack her things and go back to her father's house. After hearing all these, Sandra's whole body was shaking. She looked at her bags and remembered the reason why she left her husband, and she felt like the ground should open up and swallow her. How foolish she had been. Sandra managed to put herself together. She carried her bags and went to Amadala's house. On reaching there, she narrated everything to her, and Amadala did not believe what Sandra told her. She thought Sandra was just making up the story. Sandra and Amadala then agreed to pay Amaka a sudden visit to her house the next day in order for Amadala to confirm what she just heard. This was the couple that everyone sees as the definition of a perfect couple. They go to events wearing the same outfit, and their public display of affection was top-notch. The following day, Sandra and Amadala dressed up and went to Amaka's house. They stood close to the door, and as already said, it didn't take long before they started hearing voices of the two living together. The argument was so hot, and the kind of abusive words they used on themselves was something else. After listening for a while, Sandra and Amadala decided to go into the house. They pushed the door open and entered without knocking. Amaka and Ryan tried to cover up, but it was already too late. Ryan's hand was up in the air to hit Amaka, and the both of them were in great shock when they saw Sandra and Amadala. Sandra opened her mouth and unleashed all her anger on them, telling them that they were both a disgrace and she was highly disappointed in them. Now it was clear that the reason why they don't allow visitors into their home
was to cover up their dirty secret and keep deceiving people with their lies. Omotola also spoke out her mind. This was the same people she had been praying seriously to God to bless her with their kind of marriage. She looked at them with so much disgust and wished she never believed all their lies. After they were done, they both left, feeling annoyed. Sandra and Omotola helped to spread the news of what they just found out, and everyone hated them for that. Amaka, knowing that her cover had been blown, she used that opportunity to leave the already messed up marriage full of lies and pretense. She gathered her luggages and left the city in shame. Ryan's friends, who also heard what happened, were disappointed in Ryan for lying to them. They distanced themselves from him and refused him coming close to them. Omotola encouraged Sandra to go back to her husband and plead for his forgiveness. Sandra was greatly ashamed of herself, but she just had to do the needful. She went back to Eric, knelt before him and apologized to him, telling him how sorry she was. Eric did not hesitate to forgive and accept her back. Sandra then understood her mistakes and realized that she shouldn't allow what was happening outside or in other homes and what people say to her to affect her marriage. Her love for her husband increased and they lived happily ever after.